share my screen. And I'll just minimize this. All right. If someone could verify that we're indeed broadcasting. Okay, so let's go back to our Visual Studio, and let me open up my website. It's somewhere. My documents, Northeastern, CS GitHub, CS5610, net open. Okay, all right, so we opened that up. We want to be able to connect to a database. So let me start my database. I'm going to start a local instance of my database. What I did is I downloaded SQL Server Express Edition, right? It's a mini version of the entire SQL Server stack. It's a reduced set of functionality, but it's plenty for what we're going to be using in this class. Okay, so let me get it started. I don't have it running as a service. I mean, I do have it running as a service, but I don't have it that it auto starts. Okay, I have to start it manually. So I need to go to Administration Tools, Services, and I have, here it is, I have SQL Server Express, and that's the name of my instance, SQL Express, and I'll start it. So I'm starting my database. I'll say OK. And I'll then go here and I'll go my Server Explorer and I'll try to connect. Let me see if I have a connection already for this. I do not. So I'm going to say add a connection. And my server is on this machine. And the server is called SQL Express. Okay. And then it's going to try and connect. Okay, there it is. So it did connect. And it says that I found these various databases. Which database do you want to connect to? And I have here CS5610 for lectures. So I'm going to select that one. I'll say test connection, and it is connected. Okay, very good. I'll go there. I'll connect. There it is. So it's connected. I can open it up and see what tables I have in there. All right. So I was playing around with a website that I'm thinking of building over the next couple of lectures. Probably will spill over to my course in the spring, and where people can kind of like a social networking site for people that have financial problems, and they might perhaps in developing countries, and they might ask for money, or for instead of having a intermediary people that collect money for the poor, having a peer-to-peer funding strategy, right, where you can donate money directly to someone, perhaps through a phone or through some account. Okay, so I was playing around with that, and so for instance, let's create a table that might capture information about people that want to sponsor. Okay, so people that want to be able to sponsor a child, or sponsor a family, or sponsor a particular project in a developing country, they might be able to register through this website. Okay, so let's create a table. Let's create a brand new table. I'll call it the sponsor. I am a sponsor, right? And that's my primary key. The ID, I'll leave that. I will make this an identity, meaning I want the primary key to automatically increment, right? Every time I do an insert into a database, I don't want to deal with the IDs. I want it to automatically just go over 1, 2, 3 automatically. Okay. The next thing that I might have here is perhaps first name, last name, email, username, password, things like that. Okay, so let's create some fields here. I'll call it This is maybe my first name, and this will be a varchar 50. Maybe a last name, also varchar 50. Maybe I'll have perhaps email as well. Email varchar 50. Maybe I'll have a username, and I'll have a password. Okay, this is okay for now. We'll add other things later on, right? Maybe we have addresses, we'll have account numbers, well, a lot of other things that we could add to this, right? For now, let's start off with this. Okay, and I'll say update. I'll say, okay, do you want to update the database? I'll say yes. And if we go here and we do a refresh, hopefully the database is there. There it is. So we have sponsor. We can view the data table, the data in this table, and we can insert a couple of things here. Right? Maybe we'll create a couple of Alice Wonderland. Email, perhaps Alice at Wonderland.com. Maybe it's Alice, and password, I'm just going to say Alice for now. All right, we have one user. We have one user there. Okay, one sponsor. Everybody okay? All right. All right. So what I would like to be able to do is have a page that would allow me to manipulate or update or interact with this data. Okay, and Visual Studio has several components in the toolbox. Right, if you go into View Toolbox, right, has many components in here that allow you to interact with databases. Okay, let me go to my Solution Explorer. Let me create a page for this. I'm going to my experiments, and let me create here an experiment for a database. So let's create here. Add new folder, and another experiment that I'd like to add here, database. And under here, I'd like to create here another directory, and call it donations. Okay, and I'm going to create here a page, a web form. I'll call it sponsors. Sponsors.aspx. There it is. Okay. There's nothing peculiar about this web form, other than notice that there's several HTML embedded in here. We have head, we have body, we have divs, we have forms, right? But notice that because we're using the ASPX technology, it adds a couple other things here that are not HTML. Okay, notice that it adds at the top, it adds this funny looking pointy bracket %, @. You see that, right? That is a tag, right? Directive actually, that is meant to execute on the server. Right? The client, the browser who asks for this page, will never actually see that tag at the top. Okay, this is meant to be interpreted on the server, executed, and then it'll generate the HTML code that then will make it to the client, to the browser. Okay, this is meant to be executed on the server. Notice that accompanying the ASPX, there's an additional file. See that? Right? It's called the sponsors.aspx.cs. Right? If you open it up, it is a C#. It's C# code. Okay. This technique allows you to split the maintenance, the manipulation, the development of the page into two distinct pieces. Right. One is meant for presentation. Here's where you put all the tags. Here's where you decide, how you're going to present the data, right? How you're going to, and perhaps a designer would be spending most of their time here in this ASPX, right? Making the page look presentable, making the page look very professional. Okay, and the but here you would not have code that perhaps accesses the database, does any networking or any heavyweight computation. You would not do it here in the page, although you can, right? But it's generally considered to be bad practice, right? It is better. It is considered to be a better practice to put any heavyweight computations here, right, in the accompanying C# code, right? Any database access, any SQL query or any it's better to put it here, right? Or any data model, or any Java, any C# classes that represent the data model, right, from the database would be better to put here, right? We'll come back to this C# code a little later, right? Let's stick first in this lecture. Let's stick first to the ASPX, okay? All right, let's stick here. One thing that I would like to add here is my CSS to make this look a little pretty. No, actually, no, let's do that a little later. All right, one thing that I can do, right, if I go to my server, is that Visual Studio allows me to very easily drag, right, things into my page, right, to make it very easy to interact with the database directly, right? It has in the toolbox, it has quite a few controls, right, that allow you to represent most of the standard HTML controls, right, such as hyperlinks, checkboxes, buttons, and things like that, lists, but their version, their server-side version, okay, okay, and there's some more advanced ones that allow you to interact with the database, right, that very easily say, hey, go off and, there's this table out there in the database, go fetch it. Go fetch the data and just, boom, display it here, okay? All right, so let me introduce to you one of these controls. Let me go into a database in the Server Explorer, and this has to be done in the split view. Let me add at least one H1 here, right? I'll say here H1 sponsors. Okay, and in here, let me just add a paragraph. Okay. All right. So now, if I grab the table that I just created this table, right? All right. Let me drag it. I can grab that and just drag it into the page and drop it in there. Okay. Notice what happened. Two things happened. One of the things that happened is that it creates what is called a SQL data source tag over here. That's one of the controls. It creates two controls. One is the SQL data source control, and the other one is a grid view control. Okay? The SQL data source control is what allows us to interact with the database. Right? It allows you to query the database, update, does all the 4 CRUD operations. Well, 5, I guess. Right? One is the insert, the delete, the update, select one, or select all. Right? So the SQL data source is what allows me to go to the database, retrieve any rows, or update any rows, or delete any rows, right? And then it makes it available in the context of the page. Remember, this is on the server side, right? This is not yet on the client. Then on the server, the grid view references. The grid view is another control that allows us to represent tabular data. And in this particular case, it is configured to grab data from this SQL data source. Right? The grid view can have data source from anywhere. It could be just an array, a two-dimensional array, right? A two-dimensional array list or a list. Yes, right? And we just says, here's a two-dimensional array. Render it, and the grid view can render that. Or in this particular case, it's using a much more powerful technique, which is pointing and says, oh, I'm grabbing the data from that SQL data source. And the SQL data source says, oh, you want data? Okay, let me go fetch it doing a select statement, and the select statement will come back with a row set, right, with a set of rows, which the grid view knows how to parse, right, and generate the row representation of that data, right? Okay, let's see what it looks like. Let's see what it looks like if I run this now. There it is. There's my lonely Alice, right? The data that I just introduced in there. See that? And any data that right, if I go back into my data and I keep adding things here, right, say Bob Marley, Bob at Marley.com. And here's Bob, oops, Bob and Bob. And so that has been introduced. I go here and I refresh, there's Bob. Okay, right, this is, this was very easy, right, to put data up on the screen, right, directly from the database. Notice that this is the client receiving the data now, right? You see that? If I look at the source, notice that I have, this table was generated. I didn't create this HTML table. Did I? I never did that, right? I did create the P. I created the H1, right? The only thing I did is drag the table onto the page, right? And I dropped it in there, and this created this entire table with its own IDs, with its own style, with its own table rows, and so on and so forth. Okay, plus some other garbage in here, right? Notice that it creates this state, this hidden input field, right? That it's going to use internally. It's using internally the framework that we're using, the .NET framework that we're using, right? It's using this hidden state variable that, notice it's inside a of a form. Where's the form? There it is. It's inside of a form that when it gets posted, when this page gets posted by either submitting a button or clicking a submit button or anything, right? The whole thing gets posted back to the server, right? And the server can recognize this page, right, by the fact that this hidden input field gets posted back to the server and says, oh, yes, I remember this page. I rendered it a couple of seconds ago, right? And it maintains a server-side information that is able to use this as a key to say, oh, it's the same page, right? So it can maintain a conversation with this page. If you remember, HTML is it's a stateless protocol, right? There is no way for the server to remember anything between when you submit a page, right? It has no way to distinguish you submitting a page, right, submitting a form, from someone else submitting a form. Yes, right. There's no way to distinguish unless we do something, right? We invented early on when we ran into this issue of the HTML being a stateless, HTTP being a stateless protocol. We invented a technique to get around that problem, right? How can we create, right, a technology that allows a person to have a conversation, right? It says, hey, it's me. It's not that person. It's me. How can we distinguish each other, right, from one person to the next, right? We invented cookies back then, right, which are still widely used. That it is a browser technology that will submit an identifier every time it goes to a particular domain. It says, hey, it's me again. It's me again. It's me again, right? And that way the server can use this identifier and identify you. Here, we're not using cookies. This is using a technology that the server is generating the page. Yes, it's generating the page, so it knows this key that it generated for us. Yes, that means the next time we submit the page, it's going to be the same key that it generated. So it says, oh, it's going to do a match. It says, oh, it's you again, right? And it's going to remember all this information. It's getting hot here. Okay, let's keep going. All right, let's pretty up this this page a little bit. Let's add some CSS. Let me go to a sponsor ASPX here, and I'm going to go to source, and I'm going to notice that let me add here the link href. Let me go up 1, 2. Maybe I need to stop the server. What I have somewhere, don't I? I have Bootstrap here. Bootstrap.css. I hope so. Rel style sheet. Let's see, did I go up enough? I'm down here. Down here, I went up 1. I went up again, and then up again. I think that's it, right? Let me close this. Let me refresh. No, I guess I didn't go up enough. Do I have CSS? I think so, right? Yes, I do. And it's Bootstrap, yeah. Do I have to go up 1 more? There we go. Okay, and let's paint this just a little more. I'm going to say in this div, I'm going to say class container. Here we go. And notice the 2 tags that we added, right? Here we have the grid view, right? And down below we have the SQL data source. Okay? The SQL data source has it doesn't render, right? It doesn't generate any HTML back to the client. Okay? It's only here to define, give a name to this connection to the database. Okay? All right, let me show you what's in here. As an ID, as a run at, connection string, has the delete command, has the insert command. What else does it have? It has a provider. What else does it have? It has a select and an update. It has an update here. There it is, an update command. Okay. All right. Right. If you look at this, these are this is creating a database connection to the database. Yes, and it's declaring the commands that it's going to use to interact with that database. If you ask me, right, to render the entire table, this entire thing, I'm going to use the select statement. What does the select statement do? It selects all the fields from sponsor. There it is. You see that? Right? If you ask me to update, then I will update the sponsor table, setting the first name, the last name, the email, and so on and so forth, right? Where the ID of the record is set to ID. Okay, it can do inserts, it can do deletes. Well, how? I mean, this table doesn't allow us to do inserts or deletes or updates. Well, actually, can. Right? Let's play around with this. One of the things that we might want to do is keep configuring this. Well, no, I'm sorry, not here. I notice that this is the database, this SQL data source, right? This SQL data source is being used by this grid view. The grid view is the one who's going to generate the table, right? The table representation of the data. And it says, let's see, let's see, run at server. Going to generate, so the keys, the SQL. Notice that it says the data source. Where am I getting the data source? I'm getting it from that ID over here. So that SQL data source 1 matches this SQL data source ID over here. It says that's where I'm getting my data. Okay? Right? And these are the columns I'm going to render. ID, first name, last name, email, username, and password. Right? And that's how it, notice that for each one of these columns, right, this is going to is going to say the header text, right? I can configure how I want to render this first name over here. I could change that and say I want it to be more readable, okay, not like the table fields, but right, if I render it now, notice that it's a little better, right? Right, or username and password. There it is. And perhaps I might say that I actually don't want to display the password, so I can remove these from here. Okay? And I can remove the column because I don't want that to make it out to the client. Right? I can paint it a little better. I can say to the data source, to the grid view, to use my CSS to paint the table. Right? Apply the following class, CSS class. Right? Use table, which is a known CSS class declared in my Bootstrap, right? So if I save that and I re-render, notice that it's using and applying that CSS styling to the table. Right? So that looks a little better. It looks a little better, right? Perhaps the ID we might want to remove it. Okay, but let's leave it there for now. Okay. Well, what else can we do with this? Well, no, not here. If I go back to my design view, and I click on this, notice that on the right-hand side, there's a little icon there that if I click on it, it gives me several options that I could further configure my grid view. Right? Notice that one of the things that I could do is that I could enable editing. Okay? I can enable editing. Right? If I save that, and I go back and I re-render, notice that it adds another column at the end or at the beginning that would allow me to edit this. Right? If I click on edit, notice what it does is that it refreshes. Notice what's happening, right? Look at this over here on this side over here. You see that? If I click on edit, you see that it flashed? What's happening here is that the entire page is being re-rendered. Right? This whole thing is being submitted to the database. He says, hey, they want to edit it. The server re-renders the entire page, right? It regenerates the HTML, replacing the edit link with an update link and a cancel link. See that? And it re-renders the first, the last, and the email as input fields. See that? Right, the whole page is being re-rendered. We are not dynamically changing this on the client using JavaScript. Right, this whole thing is being re-rendered on the server, and we're getting a brand new page. You see that? Okay. And here I can change this. Right, I can change the email to just Wonder, and I can say update. This whole thing is being resubmitted back to the server. Right, it's being re-updated, and then we get the resulting re-rendering of the page. Okay. Now this page is a very simple page, so we don't see the flicker. But imagine that this would contain much more content. Right, lots and lots of content, right? And we have images, and you have movies here, and advertisement, and you have tons. I mean, what you would typically find in today's pages, right? It could be that if you have a lot of this re-rendering, right? You could start to see some flickering, right? You could start things being re-rendered or re-downloaded or which might be unwieldy or might be not acceptable, right? That you see this flickering. Right? So again, if in your page you're going to have a lot of dynamic content, right? That you need to re-render, it might be that the previous architecture we have been looking at previously, where you're doing most of the re-rendering on the client, would be a better solution. Okay, but if this is not if this is a page that it has mostly tabular format. It's you just want to have a very quick ability to manipulate the data. This is perfect, right? It's very easy. I just drag and drop, and I was able to notice if I go back to my database. And I go to my data, into a Server Explorer, and I go back to my data here, and I refresh. Notice my email, right, hasn't changed, but if I refresh, notice that it has changed. See that? database is changing. So I have very easily, very quickly given a way to manipulate data from the client. Right. Let me go back to my page here, sponsors, and let me go to my source. I really don't like the command field for the edit button to be here. I'm going to move it down to be my last column instead. Right, if I re-render, oops, cancel. Notice that it's on my right-hand side now. Okay. Notice that when I click on edit, the ID, see that the ID is not editable, right? That's because that particular field, the ID field, it's been configured for read-only. See that? Right? Whereas all the other ones have not been configured for read-only. Okay. All right. What other things can we configure? Let's see. Let's go back to our design. We could also configure this. If I go and click on this again, we have for deleting, right? It'll add a link for us to be able to delete that particular record. Enable sorting, enable paging. I mean, you know, a lot of these things you would have to, you know, implement yourself, right? But out of the box, right, the framework allows you to configure all these things, right? Now it's now obviously these things you can also implement on using Angular, but not with the ease of being just drag and drop, right? But eventually, I know Angular is a very very new technology. We probably will see soon, you know, IDEs. There are some IDEs that might support this, that you can drag and drop certain things onto the page, and you have client implementation of these things. You know, that'd be a great project for you guys to enable, right? To work on. Right. If I save this now, and I go back to my page, oops. If I go back to my page and I where's my page here, and I re-render. Oh wait, I'm going to say cancel. Notice how it rendered now. You see that there's now an additional delete link that was not there before. And notice that now that each one of these, the headers are clickable now, right? That can be sorted. So I can either sort by email, right? Notice that now. Notice that it's flickering. You see that's flickering, right? It's the whole page is being submitted, right? To the server. Says, hey, they want to sort this. The server recalculates the page and spits out new HTML that gets re-rendered. Okay. I notice I can sort forwards and backwards on the email, or by last name, first name, or by ID. Make sense? Everybody okay? Okay. Let's create an additional data point that we can remove. So let's go to my data, and we'll create here. We'll call his Bobby tables. Bobby at tables. Bobby. If we re-render, because here's Bobby, I could remove Bobby. Just so it's Bobby's here. So if I refresh, Bobby is there. If I click on delete, poof, it's gone. Right? And if I go to my database and I refresh, Bobby's no longer there. Everybody okay? All right. All right. All right. So we would like to be able to also create sponsors here. Right? So let's create sponsors. Let's add here. Let me go to my page, my Solution Explorer. I would like to be able to create, right? Create a new element in here. So let's drag now into our page. Where's our page? Our sponsors page, right? Right after the sponsors, let's drag in here another something else from the toolbox. We're going to add here, not grid view, we're going to add a details view. right? Let's drag here a details view. We'll drag it in here. That's another component inside our toolbox. And it says, okay, I can show the details of a particular record, right? A grid view is meant to show summary information about lots and lots of records, yes? Whereas the details view is a control that is meant to represent a particular record, right? Perhaps in its own page, right? And take up, it can take up the entire page and display all the details about a particular record that you've selected for maybe for addition or for editing. Okay, we can configure and say to point it to a particular data source. Right now, we already have a data source here, don't we? It says, well, I want to use the same data source that is already in the page. Okay, so we're going to select that. It says, notice that it reads the data source and says, oh, okay, this is a particular record. It has these fields: ID, first name, last name, email, source, username, and password. Okay, so I'll create that. Right. And what I want to be able to do is enable insertion. I want to enable insertion. And I want to say, I want to save this. Okay. If I refresh this, notice that it appears over here. See that? It says Alice 109. What it does is that it uses a select statement. It says, since I'm supposed to show the details of a record, and you haven't told me which record, right? What I'm going to do is I'm going to get all the records, and I'm going to look at the first record in that table. The first that I find, arbitrarily, I'll just choose the first one, right? Which happens to be Alice. Make sense? Okay. Now, here, if I click on New, right, notice that everything changes to a form, right? A form that I can insert, and I can here add, for instance, Charlie Garcia, CharlieGarcia.com, Charlie and Charlie. I'll say insert. Notice that Charlie appears now. See that? All right, so this, this is a very easy way to start editing or adding things to a table. Let's change this a little bit. What we might want to do is take out that behavior that it automatically starts off with the first record. Right, that's kind of annoying, right? So let's change that a little bit. Let me go back to my editor here. Right, I can click on this and look at the properties. Look at the different properties. Right, if you click on properties, you get a property sheet on the right-hand side. See that? Right. One of the things that we could do, if you start looking through this, right, you have accessibility. We don't want to change accessibility just yet. You can change the CSS class, so perhaps we want to use table, right? If I save that, and I go back and I re-render, notice that it renders a little different, right? It's applying the table class to this, right? Notice that it added 2 Charlies because it's remembering that it initially had posted the fact that you had inserted Charlie, so it's still part of the post. So it asked me, do you want to post this again? That's one of the annoying things, right? Let's remove that. What else can we change here? Let's see. Empty data text, appearance behavior. Let's see. It says you can generate the rows, client mode, default mode. It says read only. That's the default. Default mode is that I will read. I will show you the record that I have, yes, and you can't change it. Notice it's for read only. That's what it's doing, right? It's showing a record, arbitrarily chose the first record, right? And it's only read only. You can't modify it. Well, what I would like to be able to do is say, well, I don't want the default to be read only. I would like it to be insert to be the default. Okay, notice how it changes and says that I will insert and cancel by default. If I come back here and I refresh, it didn't work. Sponsor. Oh, there it is. Okay, I had to refresh the page. There it is. So by default, it comes here and says, I'm empty. I'm ready to insert things into the table. right? And as I insert them, I can say Dan. I can choose. Notice that down below I only have Alice, Bob, and Charlie. I can add Dan, Daniel, Craig, Daniel at 007.com, Daniel. Insert. Okay, it disappears, and then we see that Daniel's down below. Does it make sense? Yes? All right. Okay. All right, let's do an equivalent page, but for the people that we're sponsoring, right? So the sponsored, right? So we have a sponsor who sponsors a sponsored child or family or project, right? There's two ways that we could look at this. We can either have that one person can sponsor many children, yes, or maybe one sponsor can sponsor many families, many children, many projects, right? So that would be a strict one-to-many relationship, okay, where you have one record. I'm not sure how many of you have done databases before. Who did 5200 or equivalent database? Okay, half of you. Okay, so let me very quickly. We represent graphically this way, right? We say that this is the sponsor table, sponsor, who is sponsoring several sponsored. Okay. And it's a one-to-many relationship, and the relationship is called sponsors. So that's the name of the relationship. Direction of that way, right? This sponsor sponsors several sponsored children or family or whatever, right? And the way this is implemented in a database is by declaring a primary key here and declaring a foreign key over here. Okay, and this foreign key just relates, references the primary key on the sponsor table. Okay, that's one way to implement it. The other way to implement it is this other way. So here we have, I'll call it S1, and here's a sponsored SD, sponsor, and maybe SR, sponsor and sponsored. The other way to implement it is that maybe you could have one child or one family sponsored by many people. Yes? Maybe I can sponsor many children, and a particular child can be sponsored by many sponsors. Yes? More like a many-to-many relationship. More what you might find in a social networking setting, right? Where each person is related to many different people, and one of those, there's many-to-many friends. Yes, I have many friends, and that friend has many friends. Yes. So here you might have a mapping table or an association class, right? Following the same name of that relationship. So this might be an association class sponsoring that has two foreign keys. That says, here's a foreign key that goes to whoever is doing the sponsoring. Okay, hey, that person is sponsoring another foreign key referencing the child or family who's being sponsored. Yes? By saying, hey, that guy is sponsoring that other guy. Make sense? Right? Let's go with a simple case first. Right? This is much easier, but it's limited. Right? Let's look at this first, and then we'll revisit it and implement it using this other way with the mapping table. Okay? This one is nicer because you can, for instance, capture data. The mapping table version, right? You can capture not only these foreign keys, but you can capture other things, right? Maybe you can capture things such as, is the sponsoring a one-time thing? Is it a recurring sponsor? You can capture things on when did the sponsoring start, when does it end, right? You can capture many other things in here. Okay, not only just the foreign keys of saying who's sponsoring what. Okay, well, let's go with this one, which is much easier to understand. All right, so let me create Let me create the other table, right? Yeah, I can create the table using the same tool inside of Visual Studio, or if you have access to SQL Server Management Studio, you can use that as well. Okay, so let me open that up. Actually, I prefer the Visual Studio interface. It's a little more modern, so it's a little cleaner. So let me stay here. Let me go and start off. Yeah, let me connect to that. If I connect to it, we'll see that the database is there, the lectures, right? And we have the tables. We have the sponsored. I can look at the first 100 rows, first 1,000 rows, and there they are, right? We see Alice, Bob, Charlie, and Dan. Yes, and this is a select. All right, so I can interact with it either way, either from here or from within Visual Studio. So let me go back here and let me create another table. And this will give us a chance to refresh this. Let me go to my server. Let me close the properties, my Server Explorer, and let me go back to my database and say I want to create another table, add new table. I'll call it sponsored. Notice that here we can give the name of this here, sponsored. Okay, we'll say that this is identity. I don't want to deal with the creation of the primary keys. And instead of creating the fields here, I'll use this tool up here. Right, I'll call this. This also has a first name, also varchar. This also has a last name, varchar. Presumably, these are people we're sponsoring. A child in a developing country. They might have. What else might they have here? Let's keep it simple. Let's just have that. One of the things, I mean, what might want to add here is saying that, who's sponsoring me? I want to know who's sponsoring, meaning, right? And we're using this implementation, right? This sponsor is sponsoring many sponsored children, and each child knows who's sponsoring them. Make sense? Right? So to create this relationship, we're going to say sponsored ID, meaning this is the ID, right, of the sponsor. Right? This is a record whose primary key, right, I'm going to use as a reference. So this is going to be an integer. This is going to be a foreign key, foreign key that references a sponsored. What is it? What do we call sponsor, right? The sponsor table ID. Okay. All right. And I'm going to update the table. It's going to create these. I'm going to add another thing here. I forgot. I'm also going to add here the a fields to keep track on, what country do you live, and what continent do you live. Right? People that are looking to sponsor a child, they might want to sponsor, different children in different countries or different continents. Right? So I'll add here a country. And have here a continent. Okay. All right. I'm going to update the table. Let me say update. Generate the table. Okay. If I go to my SQL server and I refresh this, notice that sponsor is there. There it is. Okay, there it is. I can create the data here. Okay. Here I will create some here. So I'm going to create just first, last, country, continent. I'll say Africa. Nobody's sponsoring yet. This person. first two, last two, country, Africa. For those two, and I'm going to create a couple more. First three, last three, I'll say South America. Say first four, last four, South America. Okay, we have two people that can be sponsored, and what I want to be able to do is again have, now obviously this is not what you would use to register, obviously, right? This is kind of like an admin page. Yes, me as an administrator, I can delete people, I can create people, right? So this is an admin page. We can create a registration page a little later. We'll create that in a second. Let's see. Let's create a page for the sponsored. Let's go here, and let's go to my Solution Explorer. And here I can go into my experiments and into my database. And to donations, I'll create a sponsored. I'll go quickly now because we already know how to do this, right? I'll say add web form. This is the sponsored ASPX. And in here, real quick, we're going to copy from the other one the link. I'll copy it from here and paste it in here. Right, we're going to have an H1 sponsored, and this is going to be class equal container. Very good. And I'm going to have a paragraph where I'm going to drag my table. Yes, let's do that. That has to be done in the design view. So here, I'm going to my Server Explorer. I drag. I need to refresh this. I'll refresh this with the page that I just created. There it is. I'm going to drag it in here. There it is. I'm going to say enable everything: paging, sorting, editing, deleting. Right. I'm going to save that, and let's see if it got deployed. Right. So if in sponsors, if I go to sponsored, there it is. So the page made it in there. Let me paint it nice. So let me go in here and let me add here a CSS to the grid view. I want this to use table. All right. Okay, so that's working. Let me see if it refreshes. There it is. I'm going to move this last column to the last column. This first column, I'm going to remove it to the last. There it is. So it's at the right-hand side, and notice that nobody's sponsoring anybody just yet. Okay. All right. Let me add now an additional tool here that will allow me to insert sponsored children. Right. So let me drag this to the beginning, and I'm going to use the same data SQL source. I'm going to say OK. I'm going to enable inserting. Enable inserting. I'm going to save. I'm going to go back here and refresh, see if it's there. There it is. I'm going to now change the style. I use a class here, CSS class, use table. There it is. I'm now going to go to the properties and say that I want to use the default mode to be editing, right? So no, the properties for this. I want properties for this one here. Where is it? Let's see. There it is. Default mode read only. I'm going to change that to be insert. Okay. I'm going to save it. I'm going to go back here. I'm going to refresh. There it is. Right. So it's basically what we had earlier, right? But for the sponsored children. Make sense? Right? Okay, we can add another one here. We can say first 5, last 5, country, continent, we'll say Africa. Nobody's sponsoring, so I'm going to say insert just to see if this is working. There it is. So it's working, right? I can insert. Presumably, I can delete. Let's see. There we go. It's gone. Everybody okay? All right. So what we want to be able to do is, log in, right? Maybe go into a profile page and then start searching for children, right, in different continents that we want to adopt. Okay. All right. So let's create a very simple, login page. This is not the official login mechanism. We'll look at login a little later, maybe on Wednesday. But right now, I just want to be able to identify myself that I'm one of the sponsors. Yes, maybe by just providing my username. So this is not the way you would implement login, but it lets us get into do some play around with what we have so far. Let's create a very simple login page. Very simple. Let me go into Server Explorer and my Solution Explorer. I'm going to create a very simple login page. I'm going to say add a web form. I'm going to call it login. Okay. All right. So in here, like we did for the other ones, I'm going to include that CSS style sheet. I'm going to paste it in here. There it is. And what I'm going to do here, I'm going to do a class container, and I'm going to create a form here. We're going to say that we're going to type in username, right? And then a field here, input, with name equal username, right? With the class equal to form control. Okay? And then maybe a button to log in. All right? With the class equal button. Button primary. Okay? All right? So let me go to my login page. Go to my login page. Login.ASPX. Right, so that's my page. It's a very simple login page, just username, and that allows us to do this. Now, what we want to be able to do is typing our username and go into some kind of like a profile page. Yes, right. So let's create a landing profile page before we do that. So we're going to create a dummy profile page. We're going to say add a web form, and we'll call it profile. Right, and we're going to add that link to the CSS bootstrap. And in here, we're going to have, for now, we're just going to paint this pretty container, and then just here h1 profile. That when we navigate to this page, we know we've successfully navigated to this page. Yes? Everybody okay? All right, let's go back to our login page. So in our login page, what we're going to do is that this is going to be a normal form. It's not going to be a server generated form. This is going to be a true form, right? Just a plain old HTML form. The only thing it's doing is submitting the username to the server. Okay, so this is going to do action. Go to my profile, right? So when you submit my username, it's just going to be providing this username back to the server. Yes, right? So if we go here and refresh, notice that if I click on login, it just goes to the profile. Notice that I did not provide a username, so that's why it's blank. You see that? Username equal blank. If I go back and I provide something, Alice, and say enter, notice that it provides it as part of the query. You see that? Anything that follows a question mark is part of the query. The query is made up of several name-value pairs. Okay? The name equal value. The name is username equal the value Alice, whatever I typed. Where did we get the name username? We got it from we gave it a name. See the input field? Right? It says username. That's how the form, when it submits, right, the form has that mechanism that when it gets submitted, it reads all the input fields, it parses the names, right, and the values that you have provided for those fields, and it generates a URL, and it provides it as part of the URL. Okay? Now, if you don't want to provide it as a part of the URL, you can instead post it. You can say method equal post, right? What that will do is that it will submit the form, but it will not provide the data as part of the URL. It'll provide it as part of the HTTP request in the body of the request. Okay, so if we say we submit now, we refresh this first, and then we say Alice, we say login. Notice that it's not in the URL. Nonetheless, it made it to that page. Nonetheless, okay, but we don't. It's not part of the URL, right? So let's go back and let's put it the way it was. Now the profile can grab that username from the request. Okay. Now notice that this page is rendering on the server, so we have access to all sorts of server-side power. Right, we're running on the server. We have access to all the databases. We have access to everything here on the server. Right now, we're running on the server. One of the things that we could do is parse the request that comes from the client, right, that made it to the server, right? One of the things we could do, we could say, right, using these funny-looking pointy brackets, right? These are scriptlets. These are scripts that can execute on the server and have access to all the power that you have by running on the server. You can do network connections. You can read the file system. You can connect to databases. You can do anything you want, anything that you could possibly do on a desktop by running on the server. You can create access to all the server-side things that you could not have before if you're running on the client, right? If you're running on the JavaScript. If you're doing this on the JavaScript using plain old JavaScript, you have to rely on something running on the server to give you access. There's some kind of proxy on the server to give you access to server-side resources. Yes? Over here, you're running on the server. You're already executing on the server. But you can still read things that come from the client, such as, for instance, that request, right? That URL that came through there. I can retrieve the username that came from the request. What happens here is that we're running on the framework, the .NET framework, right? Running on the server, and we have access to some magical objects here that were instantiated by the framework. The framework instantiates lots of objects, right, such as the request object, right, that represents that URL that came to the server. Yes, represents the in the request object we have things such as the IP address that this request is coming from. We have the entire URL. We have the query parameters, right? We have the path, the query path, right? So one of the things that and then we have an API to retrieve all this information, right? The server has parsed all this information and gives us an object representation, right, in the form of this request instance. Okay, so one of the things that we can do is to use the request as a map, right, and retrieve from the map the parameter, right, the query parameter that is in the URL. Okay, and that is going to come back, right, and it's going to parse it, and it's going to parse it and copy it in this variable, local variable. This is C# running on the server. Okay, makes sense? Now in the profile, we can say, hello, right, and then that username. Okay. Now these are scriptlets, right? With and the syntax is that it's open greater than %. Whereas this are expressions. These are expressions. These are evaluate whatever's inside here, whatever expression you have in here. Right now, our expression is just a simple string, Right, so evaluate its value and replace this pointy bracket percent, replace it with a string representation of that expression. Yes? Right? Which is in this case is whatever you logged in as, right? Or as Alice or whatever. Okay. All right, so let's try that. Let's log in. There it is. Hello, Alice. Right? We go back and we say Bob. We say login. It says hello, Bob. Everybody okay? All right. Very good. Notice that if we look at the source, if we look at this source, it just says hello, Bob. We don't see any of those pointy brackets that are on the server, right? That executes on the server, right? It renders as plain text, yes. And the result of having executed on the server, the client, the browser only sees plain HTML. Sees any of those server-side tags, right? That's why Professor Rosella provided some technology, some tools called file view. Remember file? I don't know if you're using file view, or if you haven't, this is a good chance to start using it, right? Because we might want to see, well, how did you render this page? Me not having access to your file, right? The only thing I see is the rendered HTML. I do not see the server-side ASPX that was used to render this page. You see that? Right? I don't have access. Me, as the director, I don't have access to your ASPX. I don't see anything. I don't see this code. I don't see your sponsor ASPX. I don't see this, ASP details view. I don't see any of this grid view. I don't see any of this data source. None of that makes it to the browser. Yes, I only see plain text. But you should be, at each one of your experiments, you should be using the file view tool, right, to link to the original ASPX file, so that if I click on it, I see the original source code that was used to render that page. You see that, right? So a link to the page is no good, right? Right, because it'll just render the page, right? It'll execute on the server, and then I will only get the HTML. Instead, you would use the file view utility, right, to link to the original ASPX. See that? Right? And we'll go over that a little later. But let's go back to here. I've logged in. So I've logged in. Once I log in, what I want to be able to do here is, right, I already have a page that shows all the users, right? All the sponsors. Here, if I log in as Bob, I should only see my information, right? Right? I should not be aware of anybody else. It's just me, right? So this looks very much like a details view. It looks like very much like a details view. But before we go to a details view, let me use a grid view just to show you in the profile. Here's my profile. Yes. Let me go to my design view. Let me add a paragraph here where I'm going to drop my table. Right. Let me go into my design view, and let me drag in here. Where's my table? Here it is. So here's my sponsor. So if I drop it in here, it's going to show all the sponsors, right? It's going to show all the sponsors. Right? If I save that and I go into my profile, there it is, right? It renders all the users. Obviously, I don't want to have everybody. I want to just see who? Bob, just Bob, right? Or if I log in as Alice, I should only see Alice. See that? Right? So let's do that. Let's do that. First of all, let's paint this. Excuse me. All right, so grid view, I'm going to paint this using a CSS. So CSS equal table. Let me go back here and log in as Alice. Wait, let me refresh this. Alice. Okay, there it is, right? Hello, Alice. So I don't want to see anybody else but Alice, right? So let's go back here, and the way we could do that is what it's doing right now. It's that it's using in the data source. It's the select statement that feeds that table. It's a select stop no where clause, right? It just reads the entire thing, the entire record. What we want to be able to do is change that. So let's go back here, right? And let's look at the select statement again. Insert select. Come on. Provider, select, I think it's next. There it is. So this is my select statement. Here's my update statement. So in the select statement, what I want to be able to do is, right now it's not filtering, right? Just select all the fields from sponsor, right? That's what it's doing. What I want to be able to do is filter this and say, I don't want all the records. I only want for that particular person who's logged in. And the only thing that I have about that person is their username. Yes? So I'm going to filter this and say, I'm going to add a where clause, where username being one of the fields of this table, is equal to a parameter username. Yes? Username. Okay. So now I have to say, well, okay, I'm configuring the select statement so that it's not going to be all of them. I want to filter by username. So I've created a field, right? A parameterization field for the select command. Yes? Right? Now I have to say, well, where am I going to get that username? Right? I need to tell it, hey, the username, it's coming from that, right? From the query string. Right? So let's go down here and says, notice that all of them, the delete, the insert, they all have parameters, but the select statement doesn't have any parameters because it was a hard-coded string, right? It was, select everything, no where clause, but now I have parameters, right? So I need to declare those parameters and to say select parameters and say that I have one parameter from the query string. You can retrieve data or parameters from several places. You can retrieve them from the query string, right? I can parse it out from the query string. I can parse it out from another form, right? From one of the form elements in the page. I can parse it out from a session, right? If it's a session variable, right? Let's do it from the query string for now, right? Let's do it from the query string for now. Later on, we're going to go to session. Let me show you how to do it from the query string first. The query string, and it says, okay, fine. What is the name of the parameter? The parameter was username, right? We could choose whatever name we want. We made it the same as the field, but it doesn't have to be. It's whatever we choose it to be, right? So the name of the parameter is called username, right? We have to declare also the type is string, right? And we also have to declare since this is a query string parameter, I have to tell it, well, what is the parameter? What's the name of that parameter in the query string? It's called username. Yes, I was consistent. Yes, the parameter is called username, the field is called username, and the query parameter is also called username. Right? All right, so I'm saying the query string field is called also username. Username. So this username maps to that username. Okay, whereas this username maps to this username. Okay? Everybody okay? All right. All right. Okay, I'm going to save that. Now if I go here and refresh this, there it is. Notice that I don't have now all the records. I only have that one record, right? If I go back and I log in as Bob, I only have Bob, right? Okay. So we go back to Alice. There's Alice. But rendering this as a table, that's pretty boring. Typically what you'll want to do is render it more dynamically, right? I want to have maybe the image of the person over here, maybe some information on their side. I want to have, access to, all my HTML knowledge, right? Maybe I want to make this responsive. I want to do my own HTML, right? So what we can't do, what we could do is that instead of using the grid, I'm going to add here another a data list here. Was it? Yeah, data list. Data page. I'm going to put it right here. Okay, and I'm going to map it to my data source. Refresh schema. Wait, would you like to regenerate the grid view? No. Okay, there it is. Right. So what this does is that if I go and look at the source that it generates, look at the data list. What the data list does, it says it's the same thing as my grid view that is able to render any number of records, but the inside, here's my data list, right? It still points to the same data source. So very much like the grid view, it's reading the data from the same source, yes, but the internal, right, what it's rendering, it's not using a table. Right? It gives you the ability to have your own HTML in here, right? It's using breaks, right? Notice that if I now refresh this, wait, did I save this? Yeah, I saved it. If I refresh, notice that it renders the same information, right? The bottom one is tabular, right? Whereas the top one is kind of more open-ended, right? I could say, well, I don't want any of these, right? For instance, I don't want the ID. I don't want to have this information, the first name. I want the last name, right? I want to render it, and no break, perhaps. So notice that I can say, now it says Alice Wonderland. You see that, right? I can say, and now I can put maybe the email in parentheses. Say, in parentheses next to the name. So there it is. So Alice Wonderland, right? And maybe I don't want to put the username and password at all. I don't want to render that at all, right? So I'm more free to do whatever I want, how I want to render this data. Okay, I might have a description of myself. I might have more contact information. I might have all sorts of things here. I might have an image, right? I might have an image gallery. Right? I could have all sorts of things rendered here, and no longer would I want the grid view. I could remove the grid view. I'm not going to remove it just because I want to leave it here for you to look at the code later on. Yes. I'm sorry. Say again. Yep. You can have it as many as you want. Right? You have different renderings. Yep. I'm going to leave it, although obviously I would remove it. I won't have two ways to represent this. Right? Although for debugging, it's very useful to have it in tabular format. It gives you a very quick view of what the data is, right? So for debugging, it's very nice to have it. Once you're done debugging, you should just remove it if you don't need it anymore. Okay, so what I want to be able to do is, adopt children, right? Have here maybe a list of the children that I have adopted, right? And then maybe a link that might allow me to go and search for more children, yes, that I want to adopt. So let's go. So let's see. Right, what I want to be able to do is say, I like to have a link to like a search page, right? That will allow me to search by country, search by continent. Okay. All right. So let's create a search page. Let me go to my Solution Explorer and have a search page here. It says add a web form for search. Okay. And in here, I'll add my CSS. in here. And here I'll have my search, H1 search. Okay. And what I'm going to do here is drag all the children here. Right. I'm going to put them all in here. So by default, they're all going to display here. What I want to be able to do is do the same thing in the select statement. Yes, the select statement. I want to filter so that it doesn't show all the children. It will only show those children that are in a particular continent. Right. Right. So let me drag here first a grid view that will display. So I'm going to go to design, and I'm going to display all my sponsored children. So they're all here. This is search, so I shouldn't be able to delete or edit or sort. Well, maybe sort, and also paginate. Paginate allows me to, show 10 at a time. Right, I can go next, and show the next 10, the next 10, the next 10, and then sort. I can sort by country. I can sort by age, and sort by gender. Right. So let me save that, and I should have in my profile a link to go search. Right, so I'm going to add here my profile to search. So I'm going to have here instead of this hello. Well, actually, I'm going to leave it there only because you might just find it useful in your in the experiment. So I'm going to have here a button or link that goes to my search ASPX. Search. I'm going to say here class equal button and button success. So here, there it is. Here's my search, right? And that search, if I click on it, it goes to my search page. Yes? So in my search page, I only have 3 more minutes. In my search page, I should have some kind of form that I can submit, and it will search the for that particular continent. Okay. So let's see my search page over here. I might paint this to use my CSS equal table, and I have a form here that says my input field, maybe it says continent. So some input field that says name continent, right? And this would be class form control. Right, there it is, continent. I should put here class equal container, and then some button at the bottom to submit search, and maybe this should be for phone. So this would be maybe class button and button block. So there it is. So I can search this, and this would be button primary. So I can submit this, and I can say maybe Africa. I can say search. Right? It's using post, so perhaps this should be its own form, separate form. Okay? That posts to myself action that goes to myself to my search page, ASPX. So there it is, continent. Oh, I put it way too far. My divs are kind of backwards. This div should be up here. And the div down here should be outside of the form. There it is. There it is. Okay. So if I type here Africa, say submit, notice that it's in my URL. See that? I could use that query string to modify my select statement to use that query string to filter only for the Africa or South America or whatnot. Yes, like we did in the previous example. All right. Right. So I could go to my SQL statement here, my select, select, my select, I can say, I can put a where clause here from that where continent equal to my continent, can't spell, continent, right? And create a parameter down here to filter and say, select parameters and say here, it's a query parameter and the name is continent. The type is string and the query field is also continent. So if we refresh, notice that there it is. This is Africa, right? If I type in South America, and submit, notice that it only filters South America, right? The next thing we would like to be able to do is maybe go to a details page and see, you know, the details page of that particular child, right? And then read their story, read their predicaments, and then maybe click on donate or adopt, all right? And we'll add it to the list of children that we're adopting, okay? All right, we're gonna leave it here and we'll come back on Wednesday and we'll continue this example. All right? All right, thank you. I am here till 6 o'clock. If you do want to talk to me, it's better if you follow me and come back to my office because it gets pretty busy and I need to leave at 6. All right? Thank you. Oh, let me stop.